So imagine that you are on a business trip. You've driven a good ways and you've arrived at your destination. And as soon as you stop your car and open your door, right there is a naked man. That's what happened to Jesus. Not exactly. I mean, he wasn't driving a car. But imagine the shock and the surprise when he pulled his boat up on shore and all of a sudden there was this fellow standing there naked. Now, he was a fellow that everyone around town knew. There are folks like that in our lives. They may not run around naked, but we have folks in our lives who are similar to this fellow. Sometimes they're not quite as intense as he was. Sometimes it's that crazy uncle that shows up at family reunions and who thinks he's the most connected person there, and everybody kind of gives him wide berth. You ever had anyone like that in your family? Was it you? Just thought I'd ask. Or maybe it's more intense than that. Maybe it's that person that you meet on the street and he's just kind of babbling something semi-religious, but not really connecting with anyone. Or maybe it's that woman you meet on the street who seems totally and completely out of it. We encounter people like this man, and surely everyone in town knew who he was. The Gerasenes, I mean, he was that fellow who lived down in the tombs. We know about that. We know that odd fellow or that odd woman who does those things, but everyone kind of knows that's her. That's okay. Everything will be fine. But then he shows up, and it's got to be a little bit embarrassing that he shows up in front of Jesus like this. But what does he do? What's the first thing he says to him? Be nice to me. Be nice to me. Jesus has sought to cast out the demons. You know, at that time they thought anything that wasn't healthy was caused by demons. And so Jesus has already said he wants to cast out these demons, so he does. And now the demons don't know where they're going to go. Don't send us out into nothingness, please. So he doesn't. He sends them into the pigs. And the pigs go running off and kill themselves. They drown themselves in the lake. Lovely story, isn't it? One of the more uplifting ones of our faith. I find this a fascinating story because I think there are elements there that you and I encounter in our own lives, those people that we've talked about and others as well. For you see, a curious thing happens. This man is cured. He's made whole. He's healed. And so what does he do? He puts on clothes and he sits down at Jesus' feet. And what I find really, really fascinating about this story, he's fascinating, Jesus is fascinating, but I am really fascinated with the town folks. Because you see, what happens next, I think, is just really very predictive, not just of them, but maybe of us too. For what happens is they come back to Jesus. And here's this fellow sitting there, all healthy and doing well. And what do? They get scared. They get scared. And they tell Jesus to leave because they are afraid. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? But let me tell you, if you talk with a family therapist, they will tell you that when a family comes and sits in their office, they usually come because they have somebody they want to fix. Sometimes it's a child or a teenager. Teenagers are pretty popular in this role because somehow they're probably acting out and the family doesn't know how to deal with it. Or maybe it's mama, because mama drinks too much, and when mama drinks too much, she becomes someone that nobody wants to be around, and they can't get her to stop. Or maybe daddy's abusive. They've come to identify this person and call whoever this person is the identified patient. And what's really interesting, they'll tell you that in their practice what will often happen is as they begin to work with the family and to address the issues, and the identified patient begins to find healing for themselves, all of a sudden, the family gets scared. They get scared. And a lot of times they'll fire the therapist. Because you see what happens is when the identified patient begins to get well and doesn't bear the demons for the family anymore, every member of the family then has to step up and claim their own demons and come to terms with them. Identified patient says, I'm not going to do this anymore. The family has to deal with really what else is going on there. You and I see that. We see it in families, our families, as we live our daily lives. We see where when someone gets well, somebody else gets sick, or we isolate them, or we push away from them, or we fire their therapist. We see them in churches. We see the same kind of dynamic where as healthy things happen, there's pushback against it, so that whatever happens, there's going to be some kind of turmoil there. And unless we get honest and deal with what's happening there, then it just gets worse and worse. We see it in our communities, where as we begin to work and push and develop things for justice, that there is pushback against that, because as we shift and change and somehow become healthier and become closer to what God envisions as God's kingdom, there is always something there to stir it up and come back at us. We get scared, the community gets scared, the church gets scared. And we can live our lives out of our fear forever if we so choose. But if we do, we don't get healthy. We don't get healthy physically if we don't claim those things that are problems. We don't get healthy emotionally if we don't admit to those things that we truly need to exist. And we don't get healthy spiritually if we can't trust ourselves and each other enough to open ourselves up to the love of God in a way that allows God to transform our lives. I've seen a lot of people like this fellow. But I'm really fascinated and encouraged by finding my role today within the community, within this town, who is so afraid of giving themselves over that they're more likely to run Jesus out of town. And I think we do that sometimes too. Oh, we wouldn't say we do. And we wouldn't intend to do that. But unless you and I can claim the courage that comes in the love of God into our lives And claim that courage in a way that allows us to say, yes, God, this is me, this is who I am. I'm not really proud of it necessarily. And unless we can do that, then you and I can never fully know what we truly need, and what we truly need is God to love us and to know we're loved. And if we can do that, then we can be healed. So that's what I invite us to today. This time, let's try a different route. Let's not ask Jesus to leave. Rather, let's invite him to love us deeper and change us to be who God created us to be. Amen.